Hello, I'm Amara Razgis, and I'm with Consulting Specifying Engineer. Today we'll be talking about K through 12 schools. And I'm with Stephen Mrak, a Vice President with Peter Basso Associates, leading the mechanical engineering teams within the K through 12 school group. Steve serves as the primary technical resource and oversees the production and completion of these projects. He has about 20 years of experience in HVAC system design, production of technical drawings and specifications, product research, equipment selection and layout, and project management for both new construction and retrofit and renovation. So thank you so much, Steve. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks for having me, Amara.
All right, so my very first question is kind of a flip on the topic. Everyone's been so crazed about COVID, but what are the positives of HVAC systems? What positives have come out of the pandemic when it comes to these schools?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, initially, it took everybody by surprise and we're scrambling. But once we got our legs under us, we really started to see some important improvements come out of the HVAC side of this. Most notably in the K-12 world, we were dealing with clients that had a renewed awareness of indoor air quality and the importance of that. Districts were very concerned about proper ventilation rates, more so than they'd really ever been in the past. And that help actually identified non-functioning or underperforming HVAC systems. It led owners to the point where they were identifying inoperable outside air dampers or louvers that were completely sealed up in the past by old employees that weren't there, all under the guise of probably energy conservation back in the day. But they had been running their buildings unbeknownst to them that they weren't really ventilating very much or at all in some cases. So it really shed the light on some underperforming systems. And it also brought to the attention the importance of pre and post occupancy purge. So that's what that is. That's where a few hours before occupancy starts, they actually start ventilating and turning over that air before the occupants arrive. And then also, in my opinion, even more importantly, at the end of the day, is the post occupancy purge, to, again, ventilate it with clean, fresh, filtered outside air to purge all of the contaminants left behind by the occupants throughout the day.
Okay, yeah, so definitely some positive changes there.
Absolutely. Yep.
Good. So tell me then, what current K through 12 building trends are you seeing?
Also, for the trends, there's actually been, with the availability of the ESSER funding, which is the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief, that was part of the federal package. There was about $120 billion for infrastructure that was released. And with a lot of the trends that we're seeing, the raised awareness of some of those underperforming systems was brought to the surface. This ESSER money, this ESSER funding, came in and really allowed districts to improve and replace and catch their aging infrastructure systems up. A lot of the buildings in our area were built in the 1950s and 60s, and it's common to have original HVAC equipment still. So the trend for some of these districts was having money for the first time in a long time, and so they were able, like I mentioned, to get these systems replaced and functional. Which is great, because then it's a better learning environment for the students, for the teachers. There's numerous white papers on the importance of indoor air quality as it relates to learning environments and how well the students react. So besides the influx of money from the ESSER funding, building more localized building trends, what we're seeing is the implementation of STEM spaces, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. We're seeing kind of a refocus on these subjects with these STEM spaces. Some people, maker spaces. These real 3D oriented, hands-on learning, 3D printers, CNC machines, and this branches off into robotics programs and extracurricular teams. So I myself am a very visual learner. and so it's really cool to see these spaces come together that give these students the opportunity to really put these theories that they're learning about in practice and from a learning environment. Another trend that we're seeing a lot of in the area are early childhood education centers. So these would be your pre-K buildings that deal with anything from infants up to that 5-year-old kindergarten cutoff. We've seen probably half a dozen to a dozen of these come online recently in the last 4 or 5 years or so. There was one in particular that we just wrapped up in downtown Detroit on the Marygrove campus. This was a really great project for the community. We partnered with the Kresge Foundation, and it really is it was the kickoff to the redevelopment of the Marygrove campus, targeting a P20 campus, pre-K all the way up through first couple of years of an associate's. And our project, which was this about a 30,000 square foot early learning center, was really focused on sustainability. That was paramount to the Kresge partnership. And it was great to have the ability to implement these sustainable designs. And in this case, we achieved that by using a vertical geothermal loop system and water compared to heat pumps for each classroom space. Then we also used a water-to-water heat pump to generate low temperature hot water, which we used for in-floor radiant heating. The in-floor heat in an early childhood building it's phenomenal. They spend a lot of time on the floor, social interacting, learning, exploring their environments, and having that comfortable floor temperature really allows them to kind of focus on what they're learning and not be worried about whether they're too cold or too hot. So yeah, the early childhood centers are always great to see come online. Seeing the kids in those spaces after, I wish those spaces were around when I was growing up, because man, they are some really cool, fun spaces.
Yeah, that sounds like a terrific project. Now, you just mentioned sustainability. So what are some common energy conservation systems or applications that you're seeing in K-12 schools?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, geothermal systems are becoming more common in K-12 applications. Also on that Marygrove example job that we spoke about, we used a dedicated outdoor air system, which has an energy recovery device in it that helps pre-treat and condition all the ventilation air for the building while capturing the waste energy that would otherwise just be exhausted out of the building. Another trend that we're seeing a lot more of is demand control ventilation, also CO2 control. That's becoming more and more code required nowadays, but we still implement it obviously wherever we have to by code, but also some spaces that might not exactly require it just because it's a good practice and a good energy saver. The demand control ventilation kind of works in contrast with the over ventilation of spaces that kind of came out of the COVID-19 procedures. With the demand control ventilation, you can actually turn down the amount of ventilation air that's going into a space dependent on the occupancy and use in that space at the time. So, but from an energy conservation standpoint and sustainability, yeah, the DCV is a control strategy that's definitely here to stay and going to be implemented more and more places. Another system that we're seeing more of are variable refrigerant flow systems. These systems have an application, all these systems that we've talked about, the geothermal, the DOAS, the VRF, they all have their own applications. They're not a one size fits all. They don't apply everywhere. So that's where your engineering team can help steer owners in the right direction to help them achieve their sustainability goals while also providing systems that function to their expectations and meet their goals.
Okay, yeah, some really great examples. Thank you. So you're talking to school districts. They don't know where to start. What do you do? How do you get them on the right track regarding these different upgrades that you're talking about here?
Yeah, that's a great question. With with the school districts that we deal with, uh, they have, and school districts range in all sizes, obviously. Um, some have 5, 6 buildings, some have 20, 30 buildings. And with the funding that's available mostly through bond programs for schools, it can be a pretty long time in between renovation projects. And if you have a district full of buildings, it can be daunting when you say, wow, I've got to touch all these and bring them up to code and improve them. I don't even know where to start. So what I would recommend is there's kind of two ways I would look at starting a task like that. Is start with either building assessments, which generate the roadmap for equipment replacements and upgrades for your buildings. Now, I'm coming at this from an engineering standpoint, but there's also architectural and structural and civil assessments as well. So what we do with these building assessments is the level of assessments vary for what the expectations are, but it generally consists of walking through buildings, assessing equipment conditions and expected lives, um, interviews with maintenance staff, facilities directors to identify known issues. Just because we walk through a building as the engineer, we could see what we see, but we don't know the day-to-day struggles of equipment operation. So it's good to get kind of that base level knowledge, talking with the maintenance staff and facility directors. We can also review building management system trends to identify any other pre-existing issues. So those building assessments come together, you generate a work scope, it's a probable cost, and you can kind of prioritize that work and say, all right, this is where you need to focus. Your boiler plant, for instance, it's given you everything it owes, and it wouldn't surprise us if it didn't make it through the next heating season. And then as district funding becomes available, they can try and at least work through that prioritized list and start picking some things off. The other avenue besides the building assessment is a little more of a deep dive, what we refer to as retro commissioning. So this is where our commissioning team would come into a building and really do functional testing, deep dives of all the existing pieces of equipment. Some signs that would lead you towards retro commissioning more than just a building assessment would be you feel your building's using too much energy. Your maintenance staff is spending more time and money on maintenance issues, and your occupant complaints about comfort issues are increasing. Those all tend to point towards equipment not functioning correctly. So we do the functional testing, identify energy conservation measures, cost to implement them and potential paybacks, and also maybe identify some code compliance issues. So the retro commissioning is really more it's a longer term boots on the ground functional testing of a lot of equipment.
Wow, that's a lot of great information. Thank you. Good tips.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so today I've been speaking with Steve Mrak with Peter Basso Associates. Thank you so much for joining us. I do appreciate it.
Thanks, Mara. Thanks for having me.
All righty, thank you and goodbye.